Welcome to Dark Facade, a channel dedicated to looking past the veneer of humanity and finding its true face. I will be your tour guide down this winding path of tales, ranging from the supernatural, science fiction, and twisted love. All the stories you're about to hear are assorted bits of literature that will range from the bizarre to the unexpected. So sit back, lower the lights, and allow yourself to be taken away from everyday reality to its shadowy reflection. If you enjoy our unusual content, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to receive more. Thank you. Welcome to Dark. Hello and welcome back to Dark Facade. You are listening to Bastian and Lucia, Part 8. Over the course of time, Bastian learned to live a dual life. During the day, he was the prince of Alabin, that would soon be her king. He carried out his duties with perfunctory care because that was all he could manage. For the prince had a secret, a hidden desire that he kept buried in his heart more deeply than his familiar had, a yearning that made him endure the daylight hours and long for the night. He would stare eagerly out at the woods as he sat through obligatory meetings and matters of state. His counsel often had to repeat themselves due to his lack of attention. When questioned about his well-being, Bastian would explain away his preoccupation with Dominic's disappearance. The truth, however, was that he too had been captivated by the beauty in the woods. When sunset finally arrived, he shifted into a raven until he was outside the city walls. Once he was safe in the tree line, he became the wolf that she loved. Dusk was all but gone before he reached her cottage. There were lights burning in the windows, but no fire was in the hearth. He followed the path to her door and sniffed. Her scent was strong there. He followed it to the back of the house. There, under the light of several lanterns, he found her working in her garden. She had her basket at her side and was busy harvesting. Bastian wanted her attention. He let out a soft growl to get it. Lucia looked up with a start, then smiled. "There you are, my handsome lord," she said pleasantly. "Have you come to help me?" Bastian shifted his feet playfully in reply. "Very well, then come through the gate. We have much to do beneath the full moon. Many of my herbs are ready and must be harvested under its light," she told him. Bastian quickly went through the gate, then lied down beside her in the earth. He put a massive gray paw on her hand, silently asking for her touch. She obliged him for a moment by running her hand over his face and back before scratching him under his chin. The wolf groaned in pleasure, causing her to laugh. "You're craving affection more than normal. Have I tamed you completely?" she teased. The animal responded by rolling playfully on its back. Lucia giggled at his exploits before cupping his face. "It would seem I have," she declared before kissing him between the eyes. Her lips were soft. He felt them through the thickness of his fur. He imagined how good they would feel against his own mouth. Bastian wanted desperately to shed his disguise. He wanted her to touch his bare skin and kiss him with abandonment. The spell that the sanguine was casting over him was not one of her conscious making. He was falling in love. He had tried to deny it, but it was no use. Whatever animosity he was supposed to feel for her was gone. She had erased all the preconceived ideas he had been taught about her kind. None of it was true, especially the idea that blood witches were dangerous. In the weeks he had spent with her, she had raised her hands only to heal. Many of the people in the surrounding villages sought her out to ease their pain or sickness. She had delivered their children and shared what little she possessed with the less fortunate. Not once did she try to enslave any immortal that crossed her path, and several had in the time he had spent with her. They were as drawn to her as the light itself. She gave them only what they asked for. Frankly, she was in more danger from them than they were from her. This point was made very clear to him one evening as he lay on the floor of her laboratory while she worked. A knock on the door disrupted their blissful silence. Bastian's head shot up while his ears pricked forward in alarm. He instinctively knew something was not right. The hour was late, much too late for visitors. He growled, hoping to alert her not to open the door. She instinctively patted him on the head before walking by. Bastian became so bold as to grab her skirt in his mouth. She looked back at him in bemusement. "Let go, Navarre," she ordered softly, then proceeded to the front door. Bastian followed close behind. If she would not listen to his warnings, then he would protect her, even if it meant exposing his secret. "Who is it?" she called through the thick wood of the door. "Forgive me, my lady, but I have been told that a healer of great ability lived in this house. I need her assistance," a familiar voice said from the other side. Without hesitation, she opened the door. Bastian inwardly gasped at the sight of Baylor, a vampire that served under Lord Clothos. He was a big, brawny man with crimson hair and cold blue eyes. He focused them on the lovely blood witch in front of him. "What is it that you need?" she asked, her dark eyes now glowing the blood-amber color sanguines did when a hungry immortal was near. "That depends. Are you the one called Lucia?" he asked, his inhuman eyes as fierce as the hawk that lurked within. "I am," she nodded cautiously. "Splendid," he declared as his fangs descended. He kicked her to the floor, knocking the wind out of her. Bastian noticed that she was bleeding heavily from her stomach. The vampire had shifted between his human and bird form. His talons had cut across her abdomen. Bastian felt a blinding rage come over him when he saw the bloodsucker pick her up by her hair and start to feed. The sounds of her whimpering in pain only made him madder. "You're quite delicious, blood whore. A lot of people are looking for you. My master is one of them. But I'll make you a deal. I will keep you a secret if you keep me happy," he promised before running his hand between her legs. Lucia tried to summon her light, but the vampire caught on and shoved her against the wall with her back to him. He laughed heinously as she struggled against him before he plunged his fangs into her again. Bastian could take no more. In an instant he changed into his human form, then blasted her attacker with enough force to knock him free of her. Though he knew this might tear her throat, he read somewhere that sanguines could not bleed to death. Their blood multiplied at an accelerated rate, and they healed quickly. When he looked over at her, he saw his gamble had paid off. She was already starting to recover. Once Baylor stood back up, shaking off the attack, his eyes widened in surprise. "Prince Bastian? What are you doing here with this blood witch?" he gasped. "That's not your concern," Bastian told him. "Oh, I see," the vampire smiled. "You came to dispatch of her yourself and want the credit." Lucia's eyes descended into fear, which broke his heart. "My reasons will be as unknown to you as your disappearance will be to your master. Goodbye, Baylor," Bastian said, before rendering the vampire unconscious. "What are you going to do?" Lucia asked nervously. "I will leave it up to you," Bastian answered. "Meaning what?" she asked in confusion. "Meaning I will do whatever you want me to do with him. If you want me to kill him, I will. If you want me to send him away for good, I can do that also," he told her. Lucia looked down at the creature who tried to kill her and pondered his fate. The words of Christ echoed in her mind as she did so. "He knows not what he does. Send him away," she decreed mercifully. Bastian nodded and honored her wishes by erasing the vampire's memory and sending him far away. After performing the banishment, he turned back around to Lucia. There was uncertainty and fear in her gaze. He wanted nothing more than to put her at ease. Bastian slowly stepped towards her, only to have her back away. The wizard sighed before silently conceding to let her have control of the situation. You don't need to be afraid of me, Lucia. I mean you no harm, he assured her. The vampire didn't seem to think so, she said uneasily. Well, he was wrong, Bastian told her. Was he? She questioned, still not quite convinced of his motives. I've been at your side in the guise of your wolf for the past few weeks. If I wanted to harm you, I would have already, he replied. Where is Navarre? She asked, suddenly aware of his absence. I suspect he is roaming the forest as nature intended, the wizard surmised. You didn't hurt him? She inquired with a voice full of concern. No, Bastian gently assured her. Lucia stood quietly for a moment, contemplating the handsome stranger in front of her. He was not completely unknown. Dominic had spoken about his master many times before. She knew of Bastian's character. She knew he was kind, intelligent, powerful, and most importantly, dreamed of changing Alban once he became king. Lucia wondered if his clandestine stay at her home had been part of that plan. Was the prince quietly observing her for an important reason? She stared into his steel-gray eyes in hopes of finding an answer. Bastian met her silent inquiry with patience. He made no attempt to speak or influence her in any way. If she was to trust him, it had to be on her terms. Well, my lord, what shall we do now? She asked as she stepped closer to his towering form. What is my lady's pleasure? He smiled. To rest. The vampire's attack has weakened me, she said, feeling safe enough to admit her vulnerability. Then I shall go and leave you in peace, he replied before walking towards the door. My lord, she called softly. He turned back to look at her. Will you return tomorrow? She asked hopefully. On one condition, he said, and that is, you call me Bastian. As you wish, she nodded with a grin. Just as promised, Bastian returned to the cottage in the woods the following evening. He felt a little strange coming to see her in human form. The wolf had become a second identity for him, and the one Lucia knew him as. When he reached her door, she opened it immediately, giving him quite a start. She laughed at the surprise on his face before inviting him in. Did you know I was here? He asked. Yes, I saw you approaching out my window, she told him. Really? You just happened to be looking out the window just now, he grinned. No, I was waiting for you, she said honestly. Do you ever lie? He asked, suddenly warmed by her favor. Not often, and only when it calls for it, she answered playfully. The entire cottage smelled delicious. His eyes followed his nose into the kitchen, where she had set a table for dining. She met his curious gaze with a smile. Would you do me the honor of joining me for dinner, Your Highness? She asked. I will, but tonight I'm not a prince. I'm simply Bastian, he said, letting her know the rules of the game. Very well, Bastian. Please sit down, she invited. Since the day he entered the woods and found her home, he had not eaten much. The thought of her impending blood on his hands had squashed his appetite. As he sat at her table now, eating the food she prepared, he found it again. She smiled with pride as she watched the noble devour his plate as hungrily as the wolf he had once been. He noticed her attentive gaze and laughed. Forgive my lack of manners. It's been a while since I felt like eating, and you are an exceptional cook. Thank you, she laughed softly. They retired to her favorite spot out back by the stream. The woods were peaceful that night, with only the subtle stirrings of nocturnal creatures in the brush or trees. An owl sounded off from a nearby oak, which only added to the full moon above. As beautiful as nature was, Bastian's stare was fixed on his lovely companion. She sat quietly observing the water in front of them with a look of complete contentment on her face. Lucia, he whispered. She looked at him. Will you sing for me? What would you like to hear? She asked while moving closer. The first song I ever heard you sing. Raphael's song, he replied. As she began to hum the opening notes, he laid his head in her lap and silently beckoned her with his deep gray gaze to touch him. She eagerly indulged his request by running her fingers through his long, thick, blonde locks. He closed his eyes in sheer pleasure as he let her song take him away and her touch take him over. So this was love, at its best and brightest. There were the moments that made people, the world over, seek it out, dream about it, dedicate poems to it. Love was magical, a force of heaven and earth that made kings and commoners, scholars and fools bend to its will without hesitation. He was glad to be one of the many that love had chosen to grace with her presence, even more so because of who she had blessed him with. Bastian did something now as a man that he had not been able to do as a wolf. He returned the blood witch's gentle touches with some of his own. His fingers traced the delicate line of her neck, then moved down to her collarbone. Lucia continued to sing, undisturbed by his gentle exploration. When her song reached its conclusion, his eyes opened. "Sing another, please," he whispered. She obliged his request until the prince fell into a deep sleep there on the banks of the stream. She smiled before covering them both in her cloak and lying down beside him. Bastian was not the only one that lost his heart that night. Lucia had come to know love as well, and it had come to her in the form of a blonde prince sent to destroy her.